Good evening. I welcome you to the Institute for Spirituality and Health, and we're delighted to have this austere group, and you're wonderful, all of you. I hear you're coming, some of you are from colleges, different places. Who's from the farthest away? Anybody from way off? Tell me right now.
Memphis.
Where?
Memphis.
Memphis. All right. That's pretty far. Illinois. Okay. Anybody farther? Connecticut. Okay. Okay. Well, we're glad all of you are here, and it just shows that even when you're away from college in summer, you can have a good experience, and we think you will here. This is a wonderful evening. I want to tell you just briefly about the Institute for Spirituality and Health, what we're about. We're here in the Texas Medical Center and have been here for 58 years. That's a long time, all the way from 1955 to the present. And our role has been to increase awareness of the role that spirituality plays in healing, in coping with a chronic illness or something like that, and also just maintaining your health. And there are about 3,000 articles in medical literature now showing that fact. So we believe that it's a true thing, and we were talking to some of us here tonight, and they're engaged in medicine. We believe it firmly. So I welcome all of you. We have a lot to cover, so I'm going to stop it there. There'll be a time for question and answers. I want to say one thing. If you parked in the gated parking lot, the big parking lot, that's great. If you parked in the little Vista parking lot, we'd like you to move your car because it's probably going to be locked in, the little one on the side. But the big parking lot, you're safe. So if you had any questions about it or you want me to, I'll be back there and I'll talk to you about it and maybe help you. Okay, Stuart, would you, I believe it's you to come up, or who? Yeah, John. There you go.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Ramsey. I'm one of the pastors at First Presbyterian Church. It's been one of the pleasures of my ministry here in Houston to participate in events like this, to meet new people and have engaging dialogue with people from different perspectives. A couple of years ago, my church, First Presbyterian, made a concerted effort to do an outreach to young adult and to college-age students from Houston, and so they hired my friend and partner in ministry, Jeremiah Morris, and he has been responsible in engaging the Houston area in, more broadly, and one of the places that he wanted to emphasize was college age and college areas. And so I was hired about 2 years ago, year and a half ago, to do ministry at Rice University. One of the things that we have been able to do consistently at Rice is holding interfaith dialogues and dialogues about faith and spirituality, giving kind of a Christian perspective, but wanting to just engage with people who come from different points of view than ours. And so we're hopeful for this evening that not only is there a lot of information, but indeed some communal bonds built between our two fellowships. And so I encourage you to get to know some people that you don't recognize. But I just wanted to say that from First Presbyterian Church, we're very grateful that you're here. And if you'd like any more information, myself or Jeremiah, a number of other people are here representing that church. And so we'd be glad to talk to you more about what all we do in Houston. But I didn't want to take any more time from our speakers. So I'm going to pass it over to Stuart, and he's going to introduce them.
Hello, everyone. My name is Stuart Nelson. I'm the project manager here at ISH. It's really wonderful to see all of you here today. So first of all, I have to say first, thank you so much for our speakers who agreed to come here tonight. I'd like to introduce this evening with a few thoughts that have been bouncing around my mind for the last week or so. Last Wednesday, I had the pleasure of visiting the Asia Society to hear Ibu Patel promote his new book on pluralism in America. He told anecdotes about his experience as an American Muslim and how it made him recognize the need for education and engagement around interfaith issues. He spoke of the responsibility that we have to cultivate a radar screen for religious tolerance and understanding. This radar screen is necessary, he explained, because religious identity drives the world. If you take issue with that supposition, then perhaps you'll allow me to broaden his claim by removing specific reference to religion and to say that systems of meaning, of which the world religions are a part, drive the world. We all have beliefs about what it means to be alive on this earth, about what responsibilities we carry with us, and about more abstract questions like what happens when we die. Our beliefs have implications for how we answer questions like, how must we act as members of a local, national, or global community? So our beliefs drive our actions. That's what Ibu Patel was getting at. Pluralism is about being confronted by the truth that everyone around us has beliefs that drive their actions, and that these beliefs do not always match our own. And then it is about understanding where to go from there. Pluralism is about finding a healthy medium between assimilation and individual identity. That everyone around us, everyone in this room, is asking these questions, and they likely have different answers to the ones we have, but that we still have to live with them. That is a profound realization. When so much is at stake personally, how do I react to those who do not believe what I believe? Being part of a pluralistic society is both a challenge and a privilege. It's a privilege to be allowed to ask these questions and to be given space like this one to answer them. It's a challenge because the answers do not come easily, and they often shake the very foundations of our identity and our heritage. This evening we are explicitly confronted with three ways of answering questions, three sets of beliefs that drive actions. We have here with us adherents to Christianity and Islam, belief systems that share a common heritage but have often been marred by conflict and divisiveness. I'm looking forward to learning about the basic tenets of the traditions that our speakers are part of and to understanding how their adherents move through the world in faith. Also in the room, perhaps in a more abstract way, is a worldview driven by the hard sciences. This system of meaning is essentially inescapable in our culture, and it is often juxtaposed with religious worldviews. It is driven by the objectivity and the empiricism that increasingly seem to be privileged in the public sphere. So there are two conversations going on this evening. One is a conversation between faiths. We have come together in this space to talk about the similarities and differences in these worldviews and to gain an appreciation for and knowledge about what these traditions bring to our cultural landscape. That is our interfaith dialogue. The other conversation is one that I hope will tighten and focus our interfaith dialogue. This is a conversation about how people of faith think about and deal with scientific worldviews that are frequently experienced as an opposition to their religious beliefs. That is, what is the experience of a person of faith within a public sphere that champions the merits of hard science, sometimes at the expense of core values and alternative systems of meaning? I'd like to thank all of you for being with us this evening and to have these conversations. Your participation is so vital. So once the speakers have given their opening remarks, please seize the opportunity to ask questions and be part of this evening. With those thoughts on the table, it's my absolute privilege to introduce our first speaker, Pastor Jeremiah Morris, who leads the young adult community at First Presbyterian Church of Houston, located in the Museum District. He received his BA from Texas Christian University and his Master in Divinity from Conwell Seminary. A student of Christian theology since his high school days, Jeremiah has participated in several interfaith and apologetics forums at Rice University over the last 2 years. He's lived in Houston since 2005 with his wife Ashley. They have 2 boys, Finn and Caleb. Please welcome Pastor Jeremiah Morris.
Thank you, Stuart, Jonathan. It is a pleasure to be here this evening. Dr. Malik and I were both laughing beforehand. We feel equally out of place. I don't know if that's going to be okay here. Yeah, that's right. Wonky is the word we've decided up front on the microphone. Dr. Malik and I were both laughing that we feel equally out of place because I've been invited to a discussion with a neurosurgeon, and I am a philosopher and a theologian. And he is saying, and I've been invited to a conversation with a pastor. So here we are both trying to figure this out. But in that exchange of both worldviews and experience, I believe that all of us stand to learn a great deal tonight. And so it's a pleasure to be here. In the 15 minutes that have been allotted to me to make an opening statement, I want to attempt to do 3 things. I want to give a basis for what I understand to be the meaning in the world, which comes from my Christian heritage, my Christian worldview. So I want to explain the basic tenets of that and how that affects my life. Secondly, I want to talk about how that worldview then interacts with the hard sciences. And then finally, start the conversation around how that worldview then interacts with an Islamic worldview. And so I can't do any of those comprehensively, giving 5 minutes to each, but I just want to drop a line in the water that hopefully will create more conversation and that we'll pursue throughout the evening. So first of all, what is it that makes up the Christian worldview that drives me as a pastor, as a man, as a husband, as a father? The first and most important central reality is this, that the Christian worldview holds that there is a triune God that stands at the center of all that is. That the reason that we exist, the reason that I believe I have air in my lungs today is because there is a creator God who is 3 in 1 who has ordained it, such that creation itself is an expression of his character and his personality, that he is a God that in creating creates things that are beautiful, complex, yet ordered, that have meaning and purpose and direction. And as a result, I believe in this God as the central reality of all that is, as C.S. Lewis says, not so much because I see him, but because I see all things by him. And he says that he believes in God in the same way he believes in the Son for that reason. And the truth is that this understanding of a triune relational God standing at the center of creation and creating us and creating a universe that is both ordered and complex, beautiful and meaningful, all of a sudden I begin to make sense of that because God stands at the center of all that is. Simultaneously, a Christian worldview affirms that all things are not the way they're supposed to be. They're immensely broken. That because man has rebelled against this triune God who has created things to display his character and personality, that we have rebelled against him, and there is now a very real brokenness in our world, such that when we start to talk about the issues of medicine and the issues of physicality, that there is a brokenness written into the system. There is disease, and there are earthquakes, and there's heartache and brokenness because man has rebelled against this creator God, and now we labor under a curse known as sin. Simultaneously, I hold this reality of a creator God, a brokenness that is pervasive in all of the universe, but finally that there is actually hope in the midst of this broken system, and that hope is in the person and the work of Jesus Christ. And so tonight I want to be clear, all my cards on the table. I'm an exclusivist, which interestingly in a discussion surrounding pluralism in our society and interacting with another faith, here I am as an exclusivist that actually believes that Jesus is the hope of the world. So why then would I be here as a part of this conversation? Because the truth is that I think it's as we learn to interact across our diversity that real unity is birthed. And so I affirm that Jesus is the hope of the world, that he stepped into the world as God in flesh, to redeem the brokenness of this world. And as a result, there is now an aim and a purpose to where we're headed. That even though things are not the way they're supposed to be, Jesus is currently redeeming and reworking them. And I believe there's actually a climax or a conclusion to history. This would be my fourth mark about the Christian worldview. Creator God, brokenness, Jesus, the Son of God has stepped into the world, and by his death and resurrection is beginning to redeem the world. And one day he will come again. I believe that there will be a genuine second coming of Jesus as the cosmic king. And I actually believe that history is moving towards that end. And so as a result, the Christian worldview stands in this place of recognizing beauty and complexity, but also brokenness. Simultaneously in the brokenness, hope for what is to come. And that hope finds its reality in the person and the work of Jesus Christ. This is the worldview that drives everything that I am. This is why I'm a pastor. This is why I labor to be a good husband and a good father, is because I want to honor my King Jesus. And so tonight, as we interact with that worldview, I invite you to ask questions, and I look forward to interacting with Dr. Malik around some of those ideas. So secondly, based off of that worldview, how then do I how do I view this interaction with the hard sciences? Quite simply, I think the idea that these have been pitted against one another, faith versus science, is a false notion. It's a false dichotomy. I would argue that science and faith are of the single thread. And the reason I would argue that is based upon the worldview that I stand upon, that I just spelled out. That if the Creator God has made all that is, and he's displaying his personality and character in what exists, I believe that in searching those things out in the form of the hard sciences, that we're actually, as Francis Collins would say, learning the language of God. That's the way he refers to the sciences. The idea being that one of the psalmists writes that day to day creation is pouring forth speech about God. And so the idea is that as a scientist, as a neurosurgeon studies the brain and seeks to bring healing to the brokenness, I believe that in so doing, we are actually drawing near to the character and the personality of God himself, because we encounter things like beauty. Beauty which is a thorn in the side of the materialist, trying to make sense of a world purely by time plus chaos equaling what we have, that ultimately beauty becomes a confusing issue. Yet if there is a rational creator standing at the center of all that is, that creates beauty as an extension of his character, all of a sudden the fact that we're encountering that in the physical world makes good sense. Not only that, complexity, order, purpose, all of these things begin to make sense even as we study the hard sciences, learning the language of God. So I would actually argue not at odds, but fully integrated. That I think ultimately the statements I've made about my faith, and this is an interesting reality. There's a current mindset that there's something that happens in the public sphere, and then privately we're people of faith. And this is what we were talking about in the office earlier, that a doctor will come in and wear his doctor hat, but then after work he'll take his doctor hat off and go be a man or a woman of faith. And the reality is that the statements I've just made about faith do not exist only in the private sector. That those are statements about history and about reality, about what is. And so to be a man of faith that stands on this worldview, it actually interacts with, by necessity, the public realm. It actually demands that I understand the hard sciences in light of that. And I think that as we begin to do that, we have a more holistic and integrated view. And it actually gives people the freedom to quit feeling like divided human beings, where privately we have this reality of faith, but publicly we have to put that aside because the public sector doesn't give space for it. I think ultimately let's be holistic human beings that interact with respect and love and realize that our worldviews determine how we interact with the public sector. So as to the question, how does my faith interact with the hard sciences? I would say with integration, not division. Finally, this is the part of the evening where I do not speak as an expert either on the sciences or on Islam. And so I look forward to Dr. Malik kind of informing me. Please don't let me put words in your mouth, so at any point I say something that you disagree with, I'd love for you to help me make sense of this. But as I've been thinking about how do our two worldviews interact and how have they historically, there's tremendous area of agreement. And I think that's a good place to start, to be able to say that there is a lot that we hold in common. If you were to spend time reading the Quran, you would see that God is the center of everything. He goes by the name Allah, and he is recognized to be the center of everything. He sends prophets and invites them to worship him, which is exactly what happens in the Old Testament and New of the Scriptures. Allah created earth in 6 days. Adam was the first man who had a wife, and there was forbidden fruit. So a very similar story to those of you who are well acquainted with a Christian worldview. They affirm Moses, Pharaoh, and the plagues in their holy text, the 10 Commandments, Noah and the Ark, David and Bathsheba, the Queen of Sheba and Solomon, Jonah and the whale, categories like sin, righteousness, judgment, heaven, hell, forgiveness, and mercy. And so when we start this conversation, I think it's easy to think of the other, that we come from different cultural backgrounds. Dr. Malik from Pakistan. I was born in Fort Worth, Texas. We have a different background, a different upbringing. I think it's helpful to recognize that there's a great deal of language shared, of understanding shared, and an ability to speak meaningfully about that. Simultaneously, I think there are significant areas of distinction. And if we're going to have genuine dialogue and genuine unity, we can't ignore distinction. And so I think it's around distinction where we learn to speak respectfully and lovingly and honoring the person we're interacting with, that we can model for a community and begin to embrace something that actually has value, which is standing for what we believe in, embracing the full-orbed reality of that, but then interacting with respect across those lines. A couple of areas of distinction that I think would be worthy of seeking out tonight are the fact that there's a radical monotheism that stands at the center of Islam, as I understand it. A radical monotheism that would ultimately say to the idea of a triune God, that would speak to that and say, well, that actually would be a great disgrace to Allah to be triune, that he is radically monotheistic. And so I look forward to you helping me understand that reality, but the fact that at the center, the idea of differentiation within God's character would actually be robbing him of part of his glory, as I understand it, or part of his honor and his weight. And so as a result, the idea that what I say stands at the center of my worldview is that there's a triune God creating, and that's how I come to understand and interact with the world, such that that becomes a very genuine distinction where we can have some honest conversation. The second is the way that we understand Jesus Christ. That historically, a Muslim understanding of Christ would say really positive things. In all 114 surahs, as far as I understand, there's nothing negative said about Jesus. He's claimed to be sinless. He's claimed to be the son of a virgin, that he is even referred to as the Word of God, the Spirit of God, a great prophet and a great man. Simultaneously, it is said throughout the Quran that it forbid that Allah should have a son, that it would be, it's called in Surah 19 a monstrous falsehood at which the heavens might crack, that Allah would have a son. And so, and then it also says in Surah 9:30 that Allah confound them, how perverse they are, that they worship the Messiah, the Son of Mary. There is no God but Allah. And so in this, it's not negative speech about Jesus. There's a very high view of Jesus within the Islamic worldview, as I understand it. Simultaneously, to affirm that Jesus could be God in flesh and that he actually died on the cross to redeem people to himself would be doctrines that historically an Islamic worldview would reject. And as a result, as we come to this dialogue, what we have to realize is that those doctrines are central to who I am. And in that, does that mean that we can't then have genuine dialogue? No. Does it mean that we can't have genuine respect? No. But it does mean if we're going to speak honestly, we have to make sense of those things. And so with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and stop and let our other speaker have his turn. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to the conversation.
Man, when you put it that way at the beginning, you said I only have 5 minutes per each of these topics. I was like, there's no way. But you did a beautiful job. It was perfect. Thank you so much, Jeremiah. Dr. Amir Malik is president of the local chapter of Ahmadiyya Muslim Community Houston and serves on the board of the Boniek Center at Rice University. He was born in Pakistan, a country in which his community has suffered religious persecution and discrimination since being declared as non-Muslims in 1974. Dr. Malik has been engaged with state and federal politicians as well as with human rights groups and NGOs in advocating for the protection of religious minorities, especially in foreign countries where freedom of religion is restricted. Dr. Malik is a practicing physician, having received his neurosurgical training at the University of Washington in Seattle and Temple University Hospital in Philadelphia. He was an assistant professor of neurosurgery at the University of Texas in Houston, serving for over 6 years prior to going on into private practice. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Amir Malik.
I'd like to start by thanking Jonathan and Stuart for somehow grabbing me today. Typically, me and Jeremiah were speaking that usually whenever there's a faith conversation, we have our pastor, who's our imam, who's sitting in the back as my backup in case I need him. And I usually sit in the back and I get to relax. And so today I'm on the podium, but I would like to wish all of you the Muslim greeting of peace, Assalamu alaikum, which means peace be on all of you. So when I was asked by Stuart to do this, obviously I felt completely out of place, and it was quite different for me, and you know, it was an opportunity. I think for our small community, we do consider this an honor for us to be invited and be part of the conversation. But by the same token, as a physician, I consider it a challenge, right? And so for a neurosurgeon, a challenge is a good thing. So I thought, well, let's do this. You know, it can't be that hard. You know, I see the imam doing it every time, so I'm sure I can do it, right? How wrong I was. But, you know, it kind of sitting back there reminded me of a joke, and I thought it probably would be good to kind of just, you know, put everybody at ease, is that a story goes that Einstein always used to take his driver to every lecture he gave. And one time the driver said, you know, professor, I can do what you do. And he says, okay, well, why don't you go ahead and give the lecture? And so he gives a great lecture, and all of a sudden a student stands up and says, oh, by the way, Professor Einstein, what do you say about so-and-so thing? And he goes, I am amazed that you do not know the answer to that question. Even my driver sitting in the back knows the answer to that. So if I'm in trouble, you know, I know who to turn to. So I thought what I would do was, obviously, Pastor Jeremiah did a great job of staying online. My job is a little challenging. Like I said, most people sitting here probably are not familiar with the Islamic faith. So I thought what I would do is kind of lay out some basic tenets so that you understand what we believe in as Muslims, you know, how we live our lives and how our worldview is shaped according to what our beliefs are and what our practices are. So I thought I'd introduce Islam and kind of then slowly go into it, and towards the end I'll kind of leave it open-ended. I think you did a very good job. I agree with most of the things the pastor said about Islam except one, and I'll come to that, except two, but who's counting here, right? So Islam comes from the root word called salima, which means peace, purity, and submission, and obedience. So we believe that Islam means a path of those who are obedient to God Almighty, which we call equivalent word in Arabic as Allah, who establishes peace with himself and with his creators. And so the followers of this religion are called Muslims. Islam, we believe, is not a new religion. It is a continuation of all the religions which came before Islam. In essence, the message and guidance which God revealed, we believe, to all the prophets before Prophet Muhammad was the same. And the message that the prophet brought was a culmination of the previous messages that came before him. So in the Holy Quran we find that God says, say we believe in Allah, God, that which has been revealed to us, and that which was revealed to Abraham and Ishmael and Isaac and Jacob and the tribes, and in that which was given to Moses and Jesus and other prophets from their Lord. So these are the names of the prophets given in the Holy Quran. We believe there were 124,000 prophets. 25 of them are named in the Holy Quran. About 50 of them have been named in the Bible, but you know that leaves a vast majority which have not been named. We believe Lord Krishna to be a prophet of God. We believe Lord Buddha to be a prophet of God. We believe Confucius in China to be a prophet of God. We believe Socrates to be a prophet, because if you read their writings, it goes in line with all the lineage of prophets. Everything that they say, we find no difference in that. So that kind of brings me to the 6 articles of faith, which are the beliefs, or the beliefs that we believe our faith is based on. The first is we believe in the oneness of God, in the oneness of Allah. We believe in all his angels and all his books. So when I say all his books, it means we believe in the scrolls of Abraham, the Torah of Moses, Psalms of David, the Gospel of Jesus Christ, and obviously the Holy Quran. But in addition to that, we also believe in the other sacred books which are other than these, which is the Avesta, scriptures of Zoroastrianism, Veda, scriptures of Hinduism, the scriptures of Buddhism, Jainism, Taoism, Confucianism, Shinto faith. So that becomes a part of our belief. We believe in all his prophets, just like the pastor said. We believe in Adam, Abraham, Noah, Ishmael, Isaac, Aaron, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad. And there are certain names which are not mentioned. Like one name is mentioned in the Holy Quran called Dhul Kifl, which we believe was Buddha, because Lord Buddha came from a place called Kapil. And Kapil was actually a capital of a small state which was situated on the border of India and Nepal. And he was called off Kapil, just like we would say, Stuart off New Orleans. So he would called off Kapil, and because there's no P in Arabic, it becomes Kifl. So Dhul Kifl we believe to be Lord Buddha, and he's mentioned in the Holy Quran. The Holy Prophet also speaks of an Indian prophet, just like I mentioned, Lord Krishna, and the Holy Prophet says there was a prophet of God in India who was dark in color, and his name was Kahan. Now, Kahan and Krishna seems a bit different, but Indians, whoever here is from that part of the subcontinent, of that part of the world, knows that Lord Krishna was called Krishna Kanaya. And Kanaya is, very similar to Kahan, just like the prophet mentioned 1400 years ago. The fifth belief is we believe in the day of resurrection, that we all have to answer for our deeds. So all of us live through life. We do good deeds, bad deeds, and our judgment happens on the day of resurrection. We believe in the decree of Allah. So these are the 6 basic beliefs that as a Muslim we have to believe in. And the decree of Allah means that the eventual outcome of all that God controls the eventual outcome of all actions in the universe. It doesn't mean that you don't have free will. It means He has knowledge of the actions which are going to be taken. And a good way to understand it is to know what you did yesterday. You can't change it. You know what it is. You had free will yesterday. And this is how, if I had to explain it to a child, this is how we do, is that you do have free will, but God is aware of that. So that is the decree of Allah. We believe in the 5 pillars of Islam. And these are, we believe, were also in some way or shape or form practiced in the previous religions. And as I mentioned them, you'll realize that some of these seem very familiar. So the pillars pertain to practice. We believe, the first is that we bear witness that God is one and Prophet Muhammad is His messenger and prophet. To be a Muslim, you have to declare that first declaration of faith, as we call it. We observe prayer. It's usually 5 times a day. We pay charity, which we call zakat. That's the third pillar of Islam, rather. We fast during the month of Ramadan, which is the 4th pillar of Islam. And then we go to pilgrimage at the house of Allah, which is in Makkah, which in these days is in Saudi Arabia, and everybody knows that. There are some other beliefs which are very important in Islam that I thought are apart from these, but kind of give you a sense for who we as Muslims are and how it shapes our worldview. A Muslim believes that every person is born innocent and free from sin. Sin is a conscious breach of some ordinance of God brought to one's attention by a prophet of God, or by one's intellect, or laws that govern a society that one lives in. Only when a person reaches maturity of an understanding can one distinguish between right and wrong, does he become accountable for his actions. As a Muslim, we believe that God does not hold anyone responsible unless He has shown him the right way or her the right way. This is the reason why God has sent so many messengers and revelations to those messengers. God always sends His guidance, warning before inflicting His punishment on people. As a Muslim, we believe that faith is not meaningful if it is followed blindly, without reasoning or understanding. A person should use his powers of reasoning and reflect upon God's teachings. And this is what we consider science to be. We consider the Quran or the Holy Scriptures to be the Word of God and science to be the act of God. A Muslim believes that all prophets were sent by God and there's no distinction made among them. In this lies, we believe, the secret of harmony and mutual respect, as people of different faiths have a common origin and we believe are essentially one. I thought I'll touch on a few other things which would be of interest to you, what our beliefs are about certain things. As Muslims, we believe that there's no compulsion in religion. The Holy Quran, chapter 2, verse 257 says, there should be no compulsion in religion. These are the exact words of the Holy Quran. It goes on to say, chapter 88, verse 22 and 23, admonish, therefore, for thou art but an admonisher. God is telling the Holy Prophet, thou hast no authority to compel them. So we believe every human is free to believe what they wish to believe, and there's no licenses given to anyone to force one's belief on others. Interreligious cooperation. We believe that the Holy Quran does not permit Muslims to treat with injustice even such enemies as had committed aggression against them due to religious enmity. So we find in the Holy Quran, chapter 5, verse 3, "And let not the enmity of a people that they hindered you from access to the sacred mosque incite you to treat them with inequity." Meaning, even though somebody has treated you badly, do not let that treatment have you treat them with inequity. Instead, help each other in good things of life, and in all such things as are based on the fear of God. Do not, however, help one another in sinful things and transgression. Now, what does the Holy Quran say about justice? "O ye who believe, be strict in observing justice, and be witness for Allah, even though it be against yourself, or against parents and kindred, whether he be rich or poor. Allah is more regardful of them both than you are." Meaning, don't try to protect others by giving false witness. God cares for them more than you care for them. "Therefore follow not low desires, so that you may be able to act equitably. And if you conceal the truth or evade it, then remember that Allah is well aware of what you do." Now, one thing which I thought would be important to mention here is freedom of speech. In reference to the recent derogatory movie regarding the Prophet that came out, the Muslims believe that freedom of speech and conscience are necessary for the process and for the progress and development of society. But we believe that this freedom must not be used to insult religions. That is why Islam forbids blasphemy, which means that a behavior or language that shows disrespect to any prophet or any religion. Though Islam does not prescribe any worldly punishment for it. I think this is an important distinction, that Islam forbids blasphemy, it prevents us from doing it, but it does not prescribe any punishment for it. The Holy Quran tells us that there has been no prophet in the previous past who did not have derogatory words used against him. So we find a few examples in the Holy Quran that give just the same example. "But there never came to them a prophet, but they mocked at him." Chapter 43 and 8. "Then we sent our messengers, one after another. Every time there came to a people their messengers, they treated him as a liar. Alas, except for my servants, there comes not a messenger to them, but they mock at him." So, in addition, the Holy Quran mentions that many blasphemous utterances of the non-believers and the hypocrites against the Holy Prophet happened without mentioning any physical punishment for them, but for the perpetrators. In contrast to that, God advised the Holy Prophet, "We will surely suffice thee against those who mock," meaning just leave them alone. We will take care of them. "And follow not the disbelievers and the hypocrites, and leave alone their annoyances, and put thy trust in Allah, for Allah is sufficient as a guardian." So instead of unfairly dealing or killing the blasphemers, the believers are advised to leave the company of such men until they change the topic of their talk. It's very simple. So I hope that this has given you some introduction to what Islam is and what the basic tenets and beliefs of Islam are. I thought that next what I would do is kind of give you a brief introduction to the kind of Islam that we espouse to, which is the Ahmadiyya Muslim community, which in essence is not different than what you just heard, except for maybe either one or two differences, and which have been the reason for great consternation from the parts of the world that we've come from. And we can get into that during the question and answer session. So I belong to the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. Our community is perhaps the oldest active Muslim organization in this nation and was established in 1920. We have the longest running American Muslim magazine, the Muslim Sunrise. Our community in the USA is established in 71 chapters. Globally, our community is a dynamic, fast-growing international revival movement within Islam. It was founded in 1889 and now spans over 200 countries with membership exceeding in tens of millions. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community is the only Islamic organization to believe that the long-awaited Messiah has come in the person of Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian in India. Ahmad claimed to be the metaphorical second coming of Jesus of Nazareth and the divine guide whose advent was foretold by the Prophet of Islam, Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community believes that God sent Ahmad like Jesus, to end religious wars, condemn bloodshed, and reinstitute morality, justice, and peace. Ahmad's advent has brought about an unprecedented era of Islamic revival. He divested Muslims, Ahmadi Muslims, and whoever joins us, of fanatical beliefs and practices by vigorously championing Islam's true and essential teachings, the ones that I just stated. He also recognized the noble teachings of the great religious founders and saints, including Zoroaster, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Krishna, Buddha, Confucius, Lao, Zhu, Guru Nanak, and explained how such teachings converged into one true religion, which we believe to be Islam. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community is the leading Islamic organization to categorically reject terrorism in any form. More than a century ago, Ahmad emphatically declared that the doctrine of violent jihad goes against the teachings of the Holy Quran and the practice of the Holy Prophet of Islam. Instead, his advent as Messiah ushered in a new era of tolerance, dialogue, and prayers. To that end, Ahmad penned more than 80 books, hundreds of letters, delivered countless lectures, and engaged in public debates and prayer duels in an intellectual and spiritual campaign to defend the honor of Islam. Following the example of the Messiah, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community continues to spread Islam's true teachings of moderation and restraint with compassion, patience, and prayers in the face of bitter opposition from the Muslim world. Similarly, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community is the only Islamic organization to endorse the separation of mosque and state. Over a century ago, Ahmad taught his followers to protect the sanctity of both religion and government by becoming righteous souls as well as loyal citizens. He cautioned against irrational interpretations of Quranic pronouncements and misapplications of the Islamic law. He continually voiced his concerns over protecting the rights of God's creatures. Today, the Ahmadiyya Muslim community continues to be an advocate for universal human rights and protections for religious and other minorities. It champions the empowerment and education of women. Its members are among the most law-abiding, educated, and engaged Muslims in the world. I think you'd be amazed to find out that the only Pakistani Muslim to win a Nobel Prize in physics was an Ahmadi Muslim. The only Pakistani Ahmadi Muslim, Pakistan created one person of international stature who eventually became the Chief Justice of the International Court of Justice at Hague, and was also president of the United Nations General Assembly from 1962 to 63. Sir Chaudhry Muhammad Zafrullah Khan, who was also of the Ahmadiyya faith. So the two notables from that country that they've produced, one you can say in politics and other in science, were Ahmadi Muslims. A unique feature of our community, which is also a driving force behind our worldwide efforts toward peace, is a central spiritual leadership called Khilafat, or spiritual successorship. Over a century ago, Ahmad reminded his followers of God's promise to safeguard the message of Islam through Khilafat, which is the spiritual institution of successorship to prophethood. In an easy way, we have a pope, so that everybody understands. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community believes that only spiritual successorship can uphold the true values of Islam and unite humanity. 5 spiritual leaders have succeeded Ahmad since his demise in 1908. The Ahmadiyya Muslim community's 5th and current spiritual head, Mirza Masroor Ahmad, resides in the United Kingdom, and he's in exile from Pakistan for obvious reasons, which we can get into. His Holiness is the guide to tens of millions of peoples around the world, and his directives are aimed at fostering absolute justice, human welfare, and social harmony. His Holiness has been on a worldwide tour for the last few years. He has visited the U.S. More than one occasion over the last 2 years. One of the reasons he's visiting the world is because he finds injustice and lack of fair play, and he fears that we are leading into something that culminated into what eventually led to a Second World War. And so he's written letters to world leaders. He is delivering lectures. He delivered a lecture at the Capitol Hill where close to 50 members of the Congress and the Senate were. He delivered a lecture at the European Parliament in December of last year, basically appealing to the world leaders that the path to peace and prosperity is absolute justice. And we were honored to have him here last month in Los Angeles, where his message was just the same. Under the leadership of its spiritual successors, our community has now built over 15,000 mosques, 500 schools, and 30 hospitals, and has translated the Holy Quran into 70 languages. To give you an understanding, since 1400 years ago, since the Prophet Muhammad came, up until this time, the Holy Quran had been translated probably into, I don't want to misquote, probably 10 or 12 languages. And to have it translated into 70 languages, some of the languages you and I can't even pronounce, is a great feat. It propagates the true teachings of Islam and the message of peace and tolerance through a 24-hour satellite television channel called MTA. The community also founded an independent disaster relief and development NGO named Humanity First, which has sent volunteers to help all major disasters in the USA, including the Hurricane Sandy and the Oklahoma tornadoes that hit this year. Finally, the community has successfully collected more than 25,000 bags of blood as part of our Muslims for Life annual blood drive campaign, which we've been running for the last 2 years to honor the victims of the attacks on September 11. So that in essence is what I had to say. I see that my 15 minutes are up. Basically, what I wanted to do was kind of give you a worldview of what we as Muslims think, what I as an Ahmadi Muslim use as my tenets to practice my faith as best as I can, and how we believe as Muslims that we should interact with the society around us. So I think with that, I thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Malik. One of the reasons I love having new speakers here is I just learn an immense amount every time, and I hope I can speak for the rest of you there. So now we're going to kind of transition into a different setup. We're going to have an open discussion, which we really wanted to emphasize this evening. So don't be shy and ask questions. We're going to have our two speakers sitting up here, and we'd really like you to engage them and ask them about their worldviews. Ask them about anything that comes to mind that you think they may be able to speak to. So, yeah. So, do we have any questions to start us off? Yes. So this, the question is about, if you couldn't hear, is about the Ahmadiyya Muslim community being declared in 1974 non-Muslims, and if Dr. Malik could elaborate on that.
Yeah, if you allow me, maybe I do need to elaborate on it a bit. The Muslim point of view is that eventually, 1400 years after the coming of the Prophet, Jesus Christ will come down to earth as the Messiah, just like Christians believe. And actually, when he comes down to earth, would have become a Muslim. And then would convert all of humanity into Islam within a span of 40 years. And that would be the end of the world. We, as Ahmadi Muslims, or rather, let me rephrase, His Holiness, who we believe to be the promised reformer of this time, Mirza Ghulam Ahmad of Qadian, who was, we believe, commissioned by God to be that person who came and was born within Islam, stated that these words were metaphorical. I was supposed to come And the person who you're waiting for is, I am that person, and I am commissioned to revive Islam. I am not commissioned to go and kill Christians and kill the swine and break cross, because that's what the words of the hadith are. He said that these are metaphorical words, that what that means is that I have to go and dialogue with them, talk to them, something similar to what we are doing. Beyond that, I am just a man, just like Prophet Muhammad was a man. I have no authority to do anything beyond dialogue and talk to people. This created a big hue and cry. You know, you can imagine. The clergy of that time said, "How dare you?" And they declared Prophet Ahmad as non-Muslim. The clergy of that time collected 400 signatures from all over India declaring him non-Muslim, and the persecution started. Unfortunately, it kind of spilled over after the partition of India and Pakistan and took a political realm. So one of the prime ministers, Prime Minister Bhutto, was having a tough time trying to win an election. So he said, well, what can I do? And so the clergy went to him and he said, you know what, we've got this sore for the last 90 years. We can't seem to deal with it. And can you fix this problem for us? I said, yeah, what can I do for you? He said, declare them non-Muslims. So for the purpose of the Constitution of Pakistan, Ahmadis are considered non-Muslim. And so that was how it got started. But unfortunately, eventually that persecution hasn't really stopped. They were hoping that this would be kind of a short thing, people would forget about it, and it doesn't stop. So it has spilled over, and now there actually is persecution of almost every other form of Islam or every other form of religion that does not conform to a certain cleric's worldview or certain cleric's view of Islam. So something that started as a small political thing has spread and has taken over. You know, we unfortunately were in the crosshairs of it. It started with us, but it hasn't really settled down yet. You know, that was kind of a longish answer of a straightforward question, I guess.
Thank you so much. I think that was on a lot of people's minds, so I appreciate you asking the question. Yes, Dr. Kaufman.
Could you touch on apostasy and the mainline Muslim attitude toward it and yours?
Did you hear the question?
I did. So, you know, I cited a verse of the Holy Quran. There's no compulsion in religion. So I take it you're a Christian. If I were to talk to you, proselytize to you, and expect you to become a Muslim, then you have the same right to proselytize to me and expect that I become a Christian. So we believe that there is no punishment for apostasy. They are not to be killed. That is what, unfortunately, the traditional view is at this point. They feel that to leave Islam is tantamount to being an enemy of God and His Prophet, and you're a traitor of the country, you know, very well knowing that countries are no longer divided on religious lines, but they still have that worldview of 1400 years ago. Even then, the Prophet did not subscribe to killing somebody for apostasy, because I stated a few verses from the Holy Quran that where God commands the Prophet that all you can do is just admonish them, just tell them what the true religion is. If he wanted apostasy, if there was a punishment for apostasy, then you know God would have had a stronger commandment than just be a simple admonisher. So we do not believe in any punishment for apostasy. You have free will. You can believe whatever you want to believe in or not believe in. So I think we do differ there.
Thanks, Dr. Malik. So I have a question, and it's one that I thought might be addressed in each of your speeches, but I was wondering each of your beliefs on what happens after we die, and how you prepare for that eventuality according to your faith. So Jeremiah, you could go, and then.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. In my opening comments, I made the comment that Jesus has stepped into the order of creation, that God has taken on flesh in the person and the work of Jesus for the purpose of redemption and for the lifting of this idea of brokenness that I was discussing, which the Christian worldview and the Islamic worldview refer to as sin. And so the idea is that man has rebelled against God and that there will be a just punishment towards that end. That God in his perfect nature is love. We hear that quoted often in our culture, and I wholeheartely affirm it. God is love. In his love, he is also perfectly just, and he will deal with sin fully and completely as a good king would. And the sense is this, that if a king or a president were to take over in the land and he were to say, I am love, and so no longer am I going to punish any offense against the land, that would actually lead to chaos, and it would actually be devastating for the land. The idea is that a good king or a good president executes justice, and that is a loving act. So in that, the question, what happens when we die? I think we will answer. We will answer to God, the good judge who is going to call to account all sin and brokenness. The Christian worldview would affirm that those who are situated within Jesus Christ, that he has made a substitutionary atonement for us, that he has made a way through faith for people to be covered in that judgment. Those who have resisted or said no to this invitation of grace and covering will deal with the realities of their brokenness against this God, and there will be judgment at that time. So the final part of your question was, how do we prepare for that? Ultimately, my preparation is trying to live with Jesus as King today. That I labor to understand what it is to respond to him in faith with the wholeness of my life and invite others to do the same, and hopes that in anticipation and confidence that when he comes again, it's going to be faith in him that equals life and joy eternally. Yeah.
I believe when you die, you should donate your organs. Because you have no use for them anymore. So after that plug from a neurosurgeon, we believe as Muslims that there is a heaven and there is a hell. In the Holy Quran, God says, no eye has seen what that is. And I don't know the exact words, whether it says no ear has heard what that is, but something to that effect, that we are not given knowledge of that. But it does give you a few pointers, if you may. God says that people who are destined for heaven are given a taste of heaven during this life. So if you have a peaceful heavenly life, there's a reasonable chance this is what you're going to get once you die. People who are destined to hell, not destined meaning that, they cannot change their destiny, but by their actions, they are going to be hellbound, get a taste of what that punishment is going to be in this life. So we believe that the eventual heaven and the eventual hell actually starts in this life. We also believe, as Ahmadi Muslims, I'm not sure if other Muslims believe that, and I think there is a certain discordance in this belief also, we believe hell to be transitory. We believe hell to be somewhat purgatory, just like you said. God, we believe, is benevolent. Everybody eventually, we believe, will get to heaven. But you have to go through a certain process of correction and refinement before you get to heaven. Like a simple example to understand that would be, everybody could be a neurosurgeon. But I would not get somebody off the street and put him in the OR and hand him a scalpel and say, okay, this is your heaven, you today are a neurosurgeon. He has to go through that process of training eventually to get to a certain level. So if you die and you're not there yet. Hell is that process of training.
Can I ask just one follow? I found that very intriguing. I'm just curious, what is it that makes the difference when you say not there yet? I'm just curious, what is the there yet in preparation for that reality? Does that make sense?
Meaning if you've lived a sinful life, okay. If all your life, you've been engaged in sin, or you've tried your best to get to that stage, but you're not quite there yet. You sinned and then you corrected yourself. You sinned and then you corrected yourself. So we do believe that there is a certain purgatory where certain people probably will be advanced into heaven faster than other, and we do believe that heaven has certain stages. So the prophets sit at a certain stage where somebody whose spiritual ascendancy during this life, because of the faculties that they have been ordained with, do not arrive to that level of prophethood, sit at a different level of heaven. So we do believe that there are different stages in heaven as well. Thanks.
Yeah, great. So a few more questions from the audience. Gentleman in the glasses. Yes, that's you. Or with the iPhone, or that's looking sharp in his suit. Sorry, I didn't. Yeah.
Amir, I just want to say that in my part-time, I'm a TV producer. When I make India Grey's Anatomy, you are the star. You're a great-looking man, and I really enjoy.
My mother would be so glad to hear that.
What I did is I had a conversation in my head. I want you to tell me if my conversation's on the right track. And forgive me, I'm going to strive for clarity. But so in the pursuit of truth about God, the Islamic faith believes that the prophets of Hindu, Buddha, Confucius, the gospel of Jesus Christ are all talking about the same God, pointing to the same God, pointing to the same truth. And the reason people today see differences in the description of God, in Jesus, in Buddha, in Hinduism, is that the manuscripts by which we're studying God from those beliefs today are incorrect. And the people who find the different truths are reading from distorted texts, which is also why when you pass out translations of a holy book, you only pass out the Quran, not, what was that one?
Buddhism doesn't have it.
Okay, well, the other holy books, with all the holy books, there's a reason why you're passing out the Quran, because that's the only one you're confident of to be true to the original form, and the ones that we have today are in fact distortions, which is not perfect texts which have been lost. Tell me if I'm on the right track.
Well, I think that is a good topic for our next seminar. That is not something that one can, it makes absolute sense. Yeah. And so, to give you an example, we can be all reading the same text, but interpreting it differently. Today I gave you an interpretation. If there was another imam sitting here other than mine, who's kind of nice to me and didn't correct me, who would have stood up and said, "How dare you?" The same verses of the Holy Quran through which I tell you there's no compulsion in religion, you can be a Muslim and then become a Christian and live to talk about it, would be blasphemy. So if we can talk about the same faith, the same scripture, the same sayings of the same person and interpret them differently, imagine if now we're talking about different faiths, different scriptures, and different sayings. So in that lies, the very crux of your question. Now, we do believe that each one of these sacred books contain truth in them. There is truth to be found in each one of these books of previous prophets. That is how God reveals secrets of the coming prophet in the previous book. So we believe that in the Old Testament are prophecies for the coming of Jesus. In the New Testament are prophecies of the coming of the Holy Prophet. Right? Jeremiah sitting here would believe differently. a Jew sitting here would believe differently about what I just stated about the Old Testament. And, you know, you can go on and go on, and it would not end. So how do you reconcile it all? I think that is, you know, the million-dollar question. And there's not an easy answer. The only answer that we, who we believe, you know, believe Prophet Ahmed, who said he came to basically stop the world of warfare and kind of bring mankind together, is exactly what we're doing. Because this is what Prophet Muhammad did. He just delivered the message. Beyond that, you can't do anything. You have no strength other than to talk to people and, you know, appeal to their sensibilities. Whenever somebody finds what they are looking for, they'll accept it. Sometimes they'll accept what I'm saying. Sometimes they'll accept what the pastor is saying. That's just the way life is. And I think in this conversation is where we get away from conflict.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yeah. So I guess the question is Paul a prophet, and also the Ahmadiyya view on Jews and how it's different from a lot of the rhetoric that we see in the media today coming from extremist Muslim groups who seem to want to persecute Jews, and the fine gentleman elaborated on that.
So I'm not a theologian either. And I read things just like you read things. So please don't quote me. We believe Jesus Christ to be a prophet. We believe he brought the Holy Bible, which was the Word of God. We do not consider Paul to be a prophet. We have nothing against Jews. And the radical Muslims probably will not live long enough to do to Jews what you just stated, because it's stated in the Quran that jihad, the way they consider it to be jihad, is no longer accepted in today's world. That jihad was supposed to be when you, as a religious faith that live in a country, are attacked. So then, boundaries of a nation were divided on the basis of religion. That basis no longer exists. Unless that basis comes back, the jihad of the Holy Quran, we believe, cannot be applied. So, and if they who pervert the Word of God and make others, young, impressionable minds, go do things in the name of God, which is not the true teaching, we believe will eventually be eliminated. And so they will be eliminated way before any of those things that you suggest they can do. And that is the reason we are persecuted. Because when we express this, obviously there's a lot of chagrin. Because it is very different than their worldview. We do not believe in a worldview that these very small minority radical Muslims believe in. By the way, I must state here that majority of the Pakistani Muslims are law-abiding, moderate Muslims. Most of my classmates in medical school, came from that category, and we were all friends. There's always a small vocal minority that kind of takes up the agenda and unfortunately gives a bad name to a big, massive majority that sits quietly. So it's important to raise your voice and not sit quietly. That's the message here. Did that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, but, and you did a superb job, but I'm a little surprised because my studies clearly indicate that Paul is so important. It shaped our Christianity as we know it. And of course, but that's fine.
Thanks. I have another question for Jeremiah that I've been wondering and wanting to ask you since we got this all organized. So, what challenges are present in being a pastor in a city as culturally, ethnically, and religiously diverse as Houston, given that you have strong faith convictions? And I get, we've all probably heard this this report. Houston, #1 most diverse city in America. Now we overtook New York. So as a pastor, as a leader in your congregation, what challenges are present, in a city like Houston that has such a wide range of views always surrounding us?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's certainly it is a multicultural world, a multicultural city. The world has come to Houston, and I view that as a wonderful thing. That actually, in my perspective, is one of the things I love most about Houston, and one of the reasons that my wife and I have made this home, even though it's not the city we grew up in. And I'll say it this way. 2 reasons. One, we learn a great deal through diversity. I think we grow as human beings through these interactions. I look forward to these sorts of events and making new friends from a different perspective and growing in that. Simultaneously, like I said, all my cards are on the table. I believe that Jesus is king. And so I love the idea of being able to interact with different worldviews, hopefully modeling it tonight and with tremendous respect and care, but at the same time inviting others to consider Jesus in hopes that they too would bow to him. And so with that aim, I think it's actually a tremendous opportunity to learn and grow by interacting with the world, as well as inviting others to take seriously the claims of Christ, to take seriously the realities that Jesus has said, things that I think require us to think and rethink and to consider. And so, yeah.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions? Yes, you've been raising your hand a few times.
What is, and this is for both of you, what is the basis for your claim to Jesus in your life personally and in Christianity historically, and for your claims to Muhammad in your life personally and in Islam historically?
Did you both get this? So it's kind of the foundations of your belief. Why do you believe what you believe, kind of about those individuals specifically?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one, historically, when I think of why have I built my life around Jesus, ultimately not just as a great teacher, not just as a great man, but as one that I believe to have conquered death. The historical evidence, I think, points to the fact that Jesus walked out of a grave, putting a stamp of approval, so to speak, of affirmation that this was not just a man just making claims. And so the reality that we could go down any number of rabbit trails that would explain that historically. I think one that would be worthy is just the reality that those disciples closest to him who ran scared when he was taken to be killed, all of a sudden something shifted and changed in those men, that they all to a man went to their death or to their exile believing that they had seen the bodily resurrected Christ. That's one small evidence amongst a sea of evidence, I think, points to the fact that Jesus really did resurrect from the dead, and he established the truth through his life, death, and resurrection. And equally as important is my personal interaction with Jesus, that I think we can talk, when we discuss evidences and history, that carries a certain weight, but the reality is that I've met Jesus. My life is radically different because of my interaction with a living Christ. I spent time with him this morning. I was talking to him while you were asking the question, going, all right, Jesus, I need you now. That as I sit here, I know I'm in constant interaction with a living Christ who has met me, who's changed me, And as a result, it's one thing to point to evidence, it's another to point to a person. And it's a person that is both transforming my life and has transformed a sea of humanity over the last several thousand years.
We believe the Holy Prophet Muhammad to be a prophet of God. We believe that God created humanity to create this man who we believe to be the perfect human being. We do not consider him to be God. We consider him to be human, just as human as you and I were. But in that humanness, we consider him to have been invested by the Holy Spirit, which God gives to his prophets, and especially to his most favored person. We believe that God created this universe so he could create Holy Prophet Muhammad. May God be pleased with him. And the reason that we believe that is because we are taught that he was a perfect embodiment of what God believes us to be as humans. So in everything good that you can think of in your life, being a student, being a son, being a daughter, being a father, a mother, a teacher, a leader, you find an example in his life, how he conducted himself. We believe that he was the person who had the perfect communion with the transcendent God, who we believe to be Allah, meaning that God spoke to him like God spoke to no other prophet, understanding that we as Muslims believe in all prophets and we do not distinguish between one or the other, but we believe in what he tells us. So he tells us that he is the most dear to me in this mankind. And if you want to be dear to me, follow his example. Follow everything that he did. And in that you will find nearness to me. I think that's pretty much.
Thanks. Any other questions? Yes, absolutely.
Jeremiah, this is a slightly challenging question.
Oh, good.
You said you put all your cards down on the table?
That's right.
So my question is, how do you reconcile the nature of God in the Old Testament with our New Testament?
Yeah.
Specifically, with this triune nature, and you mentioned Jesus being, I think you mentioned the Holy Spirit or God. So my question is, how do you, how is Jesus' nature in the Old Testament? How do you reconcile that with God of love in the New Testament?
So the question is about reconciling kind of the picture of God in the Old Testament with the picture of God in the New Testament.
And in conjunction with the Trinity where Jesus and the Spirit fit in. Is that the both and? Okay. Great question. Thank you. I'd say a couple of things. First of all, John, in the Gospel of John, John, who is Jesus' best friend on the earth, sets out to write a telling of his story. And he starts out in John 1:1 and makes it very clear that he's aiming to retell the story of creation in light of what Jesus has done. He says, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And then he commences to tell what creation looked like. And he continues to tell how the Word or the Logos is functioning. And the idea is that right there, John is pointing back to even the creation story and saying that as God the Father initiated creation, he initiated creation by his Word, which is that which emanates from him. And in that, he is identifying Jesus as being planted from the very beginning. John 1:18 will then say that Jesus has dwelt in the bosom of the Father and has now come forward to make him known. This is why later in the Gospel of John, Jesus will say, if you have seen me, you have seen the Father. Because he has been with the Father from the beginning. It was by his power as the Word of God that creation came into existence. And incidentally, I believe that to be a triune story because it says the Spirit was hovering over the face of the deep. The reason I've focused on Jesus is not because I don't equally affirm the Spirit and the Father, but because I think that's one of the points of distinction in what we're talking about. So then, how do we reconcile an Old Testament and a New Testament where one historically or at least culturally is presented as marked by the wrath of God, one by the love of God. I would argue that that both equally tell the story of wrath and love, both as part of the character of God. And I'll say it like this. In the Old Testament, God seeks out Abraham, who the scriptures say was worshiping the moon. He was an idolater by both Jewish and Christian standards, yet God comes to him and he set his affection on him. He called him to himself. And God continues to show love to a particular people, and he reveals his character to them in the way he tends to them, even when they rebel and run from him, while simultaneously, yes, pouring out his wrath on those who are standing against them. In the New Testament, what we're presented is Jesus coming in and fulfilling all that Israel was intended to be. So Jesus steps into this role. He is the perfect Israel. He becomes the true vine, whereas Israel was the false vine. And in that, Jesus then now determines or states that real relation to God is determined by his connection to Jesus, not connection to Israel. Then Jesus goes to the cross, which I would argue is the most brutal, backwards, and devastating upside-down moment in all of history, because it's the only point at which perfect, true innocence suffered. The wrath of God poured out in the most devastating of realities that I would argue has the same weight of what we see of God's wrath in the Old Testament. God's wrath poured out even on his own child. But in that, that's where love and mercy start to break into the story in the New Testament as well. And so in the end of it all, what we see is that God is still revealing himself as destroying, pouring out his wrath on sin as a display of his holy, good character, like the good king we talked about earlier that deals with judgment, but also perfectly merciful and loving because he's made a way out through Jesus. So this is why some of the great thinkers in the past would say that justice and mercy kiss at the cross of Christ. That it's there that we see the fullness of God's character displayed. Yes, wrath towards all brokenness and sin in the world. Thanks be to God that he's going to judge what has gone unjudged, what is truly broken in our system. He's going to undo the brokenness. Simultaneously, he's revealed his love and care by making a way out for those who place their faith in the sufficient work of Christ. Both Old and New Testament displaying the fullness of God's character.
Thanks, Jeremiah. I have just one thing. We're running low on time, and I really want to. If there's anything that this has taught me, is that this could be, years of conversation, and I really was looking forward to some science in here, and we've been talking a lot about faith. So in my discussions with Dr. Malik before you came here, you said that you had in mind maybe a story or two about times in your practice as a surgeon when your faith and your practice as a physician have been at a crossroads, or you've had some struggle there. And I was just wondering if you might be able to share one story with us. If not, fine, but I was really looking forward to that part of the program, and I think everyone would like to hear that. So can you do that?
I'll try.
Okay.
As Ahmadi Muslims, like I stated, we believe religion to be the word of God and science to be the act of God. And for most part, I have been blessed by being grown up as an Ahmadi Muslim in finding either reason or reconciliation in whatever I see in the practice of medicine that I practice. I think the toughest part that we as a neurosurgeon or as if any physician has to deal with is to break the news to a family whose loved one just passed away. And that is probably where a young physician is probably broken in, if you may. When I was during my residency, my chief resident would take me into these discussions, and I would sit there thinking, I could never do this. I don't know if I could ever tell a mother that his young son just passed away. And you realize that as time goes on and you mature in your profession, that ability is given to you. And you can call it whatever you want to call it. You can call it training, because there are many people who come into medicine with no faith that are able to do just as well as somebody who comes with the background that I have of a practicing Muslim who tries to do it. I probably look at it differently than somebody else. There have been times when I have had to go and counsel a Muslim family that is struggling with the news that their loved one is brain dead. And so that everybody understands here, by law, if a physician or two physicians declare that a patient is brain dead, so by law that patient is dead, although they're still hooked up to the ventilator and it seems as if they're alive. If you stroke their hand, they'll grasp it. If you stroke their foot, they'll move it. And these are primitive reflexes that continue to persist even if you're brain dead. Sometimes it's very hard for families to reconcile with that. It's very hard for families who belong to any faith to reconcile with that. And so sometimes I found myself, others wanting me to come in and intervene whenever there was a Muslim family where they felt, that I could bring some weight to the argument where, another physician may not be. And so I always thought that that was a bit of a burden that I had to carry, that was somebody else's burden to carry. But, this is something that somebody else would have done for me, and, another physician, and I'd be happy to do it for others. Similarly, sometimes you're asked to give opinions on a loved one of somebody else, but belongs to a similar community, the other side of the country. I was asked to give an opinion on a patient who was from the same faith as me, but was in New York. And so I got on the phone, and one of the local tech-savvy persons showed me the CAT scan and showed me how to move my computer so that I could see exactly the CAT scan as I would be doing it sitting here in the medical center. And then I spoke to the ICU doctor on call who, believe it or not, trained at Baylor just across the street from where I was. And probably a few times our paths crossed, but our discussion was very different. And after the input she gave me, I spoke to the family, I spoke to the elders in New York, and they withdrew life support on a 42-year-old. So, that's kind of how I've dealt with, my being a person of faith and practicing science.
Thank you so much. Do we have other questions? Yes, gentlemen.
I just want to say that it's a great forum and that everything was said, I like it very much. I think we should have more forums where we learn about other religions also. But as a M.Div. Dr. Malik has done a great job. I just wanted to let you know that in Quran, it states that Christianity is the closest to Islam. As regards to other religions, Quran declares that Christianity is closest to Islam. My question to Pastor is that is there anything in New Testament regarding the sanctity of other religions?
Is there anything in the New Testament regarding the sanctity of other religions? Is the question.
It's an interesting question, the sanctity of other religions. In one of the passages that is most often quoted to explain how a Christian is to interact with someone of a different faith, it's in the Epistle of Peter, 1 Peter 3, that says, always be ready to give a reason for the hope that you have. The idea being that whenever asked, whenever kind of put in front of a group of people or in a conversation where you're asked, what is your hope in life? To be ready to explain that Jesus is my hope in life. We should always be prepared as Christians to explain how and why Jesus has changed our life. But the second half of that verse says, but do so with gentleness and respect, such that if someone were to come away and talk about that exchange, it says in the following verse that it would be slanderous if someone were to say of that person they were disrespectful or aggressive or angry or trying to start a fight. So the idea is that when we talk about the sanctity, I think that the idea of God's image in all of humanity, which the Old and New Testament affirms, means that no matter the faith stance of the person I'm interacting with, that I'm interacting with someone who's an image bearer of God that is worthy of respect and dignity. Now, as to relatedness between faiths, I think ultimately the nature of truth as presented in Scripture, and I would argue that the nature of truth in the world is that that truth is not relative. And so if Jesus proclaims that I am the embodiment of truth as he does, that then requires that one look at him and understand the fullness of his claims as the final revelation of God. Meaning there are some things that will be closer, even as I started with the areas of agreement with Islam, I would very readily recognize that we have areas of agreement, but simultaneously the way that we see, interact with, and worship Jesus becomes the fulcrum for how we understand truth in the world.
Okay, well, we're just about out of time. I just, before John's going to give some final remarks briefly before we all leave. I wanted to personally thank you all so much for coming. And I wanted to thank the speakers from the bottom of my heart. It was a challenge, I'm sure, for both of you, and you just really rose and went above all of my expectations for the evening. So I really appreciate it. You know, if you want to drop being a surgeon and become a theologian, I'm sure you would. It wouldn't be a problem for you. And you can talk to Jeremiah about being a surgeon. So briefly, there's some publications at the back of the room, some literature regarding Ahmadiyya Islam. If you're interested, I'm sure those who provided it for you would be glad for you to take it. And also, if you want to learn more about the Institute, near the elevators, there's some sign-up sheets, and you can get on our mailing list. We'd really love to see your faces here again in the future for our other programs. So, John, for some brief final words.
Thank you, Stuart. Can we have a round of applause for Stuart putting this together? I want to say, what we've heard are two men who have profound understanding of what they believe and where they are. And I think that's to be commended for both of you. They have an identity, but their identity has allowed them to have the permission to reach out to someone else with another perspective on this world. And I think the most important, truly believe the most important thing we can do today in America is break down the walls and barriers that separate us from one another. And this conversation, I believe, has begun that for many of us, and I hope we'll continue to have them. I know we will, and that we can begin to respect and understand. One other thing, y'all may not like this, but I'm Christian because I was born and raised in a Christian household. I suspect that's a Muslim is Muslim because he's born and raised in it for the most part. And can't we honor that? What they taught me at Fuller Seminary was, if all these faiths didn't have any substance to them, they would be gone a long time ago. They have truth that has upheld a people, and that's why they remain thousands of years and will continue. And we need to honor and respect one another, and we don't need our battles between one another. We need to embrace one another. And I'm going to hug both these guys. I hope you will too before you leave. God bless you. Bye-bye.